Nice.
So, welcome to the first grains education program here. And I welcome Mike and Elizabeth, our expert speakers today. They have got tons of experience in small grain farming, and I will let them talk about themselves, in a second. I'm Manish, and I'm from Foodshed Alliance. I'm the grains manager. And many of you I might have met, and you may know me. Else, I would be the contact point for anything, any questions, anything on the grains program. And the year has been great, and we had a great outcome on the field day. And without much ado, let me give it to our expert. Our experts to take it forward. And we also have with us Tess. She is our SAGE program manager, and she has gracefully accepted to help us out with the entire presentation. So thank you, Tess. Thank you for joining. Elizabeth?
Yeah. Mike, can you introduce yourself to these folks?
Sure. My name is Mike Baki. I am the head grower at the CSG at Genesis Farm. I've been there for about 30 years now. Basically, we grow vegetables, and the main, like our fertility program rather, is not only compost, which we do a lot of, but also cover crops. And cover cropping was really my introduction into grain growing. I don't know if I should talk about all this now, but that's what initially got me interested in growing grains, was to produce my own cover crop seed. We basically try to keep the soil covered as best we can at all times. And that's why cover cropping was so important to our system. And we also had the idea of, would it be great if we had an oven and a bread a bakery and all of that. That has not come to pass. But luckily, the guys down at Marksboro Mill and Ruthie have started a great thing going, and now the Foodshed Alliance is also picking up the mantle in moving this whole idea forward, which is awesome. I want to differ with Manish with his use of the word expert. I even wrote this down in my little intro when I was thinking about what I would say, is that I'm not an expert. However, I do have some years of experience with planting and growing and harvesting a lot of different grain crops. And so I'm happy to share stuff that I've learned and basically my experience with that. So probably enough said for now. Elizabeth, how about you?
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
And I think you're downplaying your expertise a little bit, but that's fine. So my name is Elizabeth Dyck, and I am the founder and coordinator of OGRIN, which is the Organic Growers Research and Information Sharing Network. It's a small 501c3 not-for-profit organization. And for the past 20 years, I've been helping farmers in the Northeast try to integrate small grain crops into their systems, be it whether they're field crop farmers, dairy farmers, vegetable farmers, and we'll go over some of the reasons why. So I'm delighted to be here and to talk to you folks, and I'm very delighted to have Mike here to keep us on the straight and narrow because he has years of practical experience. So as you can see, this is the first webinar we're having in our education series on grain production, introduction to small grain and specialty crop production. So we want you to feel free to ask questions while we're doing our presentation, and then there'll also be an extended period after the presentation when we can go into more vigorous discussions. So if I could have the next slide, please. Yeah, so I guess what we're trying to ask during this presentation on your behalf is small grain and specialty crop production a good fit for my farm. And so the little presentation we have today will go through some of the benefits of this kind of production for the farming system and for the greater environment in New Jersey, the crops that can be grown, and there are many of them in your region. A very important piece of this is sourcing crop seed. This is a significant problem, but also opportunity. So we'll talk about that a little bit. The requirements that you need to begin grain production. And finally, but not insignificantly, what is the Foodshed Grains Alliance Grains Project, and how can it help you with grain production, processing, and marketing? So that's what we're going to be covering in our talk today. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of small grain production? Every experienced farmer I know that's doing any field crop work wants to include the small grains because of their benefits to the rest of the system. We'll get into that on the next slide. But until about 15 years ago, farmers really couldn't afford to include small grains in their production systems because the prices were so low. They were forced to sell into the commodity market, and the small grain prices historically and even currently are very low. So unless you have a very large acreage in small grains, it just wasn't profitable. But in came the local foods movement. And it started out, as probably all of you know, with vegetables and meats and milk and all sorts of things. But finally, the consumers were demanding locally grown grains. And that's changed everything for farmers in terms of profitability. So I just wanted you to see some of the wholesale and retail prices for some of these grains in your region. These are based on prices that I know about talking to those that are buying grains and those that are selling grains. So if you're growing grains organically or naturally, you can see that, you know, there's variability in the price. That has a lot to do with quality and seasonal availability. But modern wheat varieties in this market, for example, can fetch between 30 and 55 cents a pound. They can sometimes go higher than that. That's for modern wheat varieties. If you're growing a specialty wheat variety, like a heirloom grain, the prices can go higher because that grain has an added value to the customer. And if you're growing a very, very rarefied grain, like an ancient wheat, like einkorn, we'll talk about einkorn in a little bit, then the price goes up even more. And when you compare these prices to the wheat commodity market, which at the moment is around, on average, is around $6 a bushel. That's $6 for 60 pounds, right? So that's 10 cents a pound. You can see how this market, this locally infused market for artisan grains has really improved the opportunity for profitability with these grains. And of course, if you're selling directly to the consumer, then the prices go even higher. As you can see, berries, flour, rolled oats can fetch somewhere between $2 and $7 a pound if you're willing to market directly to consumers. So one of the great benefits now of growing small grains and related specialty grains on your farm can be that they're highly profitable. Next slide. Yeah, so here are some of the other benefits of small grains. This is why farmers, even when the prices were low, tried to include wheat or oats in their rotations because they provide these agroecosystem benefits to the farm. So for example, these crops have fibrous root systems. They go deep in, and widely into the soil. They're able to scavenge nutrients at depth. And of course, when the plant dies or is harvested, that organic matter remains in the soil, enriching the soil. The center picture shows another great benefit of the small grains. When you harvest off the grain, you leave behind this enormous amount of organic matter, the straw, which contains nutrients and when it's added to the soil, enriches it in terms of its organic matter. Another benefit you can see look at the rotten tomato at the bottom, and this is part of the rotation effect. These grains are grasses, right? And the grass family does not have many of the same diseases as crops like potatoes or most of the vegetable crops. So they're wonderful. You hear Mike talking about getting into grain growing by growing cover crops. This is one of the reasons I suspect he can talk about it, that he did so, it's a great break crop these are great break crops that suppress diseases and pests in a lot of other food crops. And finally, on the other side, you can see that's red clover growing as an understory in I forget which crop I had planted there. It's probably some kind of wheat on my farm. And the point here is that all of the small grains are wonderful places to establish nitrogen fixing legumes. You can grow the two crops simultaneously with either no effect on the grain yield or very little effect. And these legumes are the powerhouses of alternative natural organic farming because they supply nitrogen from the atmosphere to the farming system, and their roots also exude sort of magical compounds that really benefit soil health. So these are some great reasons to incorporate small grains in your farming system, no matter what you're growing. Mike, did you want to say anything here about?
Yeah, first off, I did wonder what the hell that picture was with the tomato. I couldn't figure out what that was.
This is actually a potato, but yeah, same
a
family.
potato. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. I heard tomato, but that's it, right. The red clover, it's probably the favorite thing that I do every spring, is frost seed that into basically all the grain plots, because it's easy. And once you take your grain off, you've got this, this beautiful green, clover stand. It typically does very well. And it can stay there then, for the next year or two. Oftentimes I'll run chickens through it after, we've taken off the grain and the clover has really got a chance to establish. But it's just a regular cover crop, easy to establish. And like I said, keeps the ground covered, which is always our goal, trying to protect the soil. And just so easy to do. And it's a great thing to start the year off by just, basically just broadcasting it. I just use a spin spreader seeder and walk the field and I do inoculate the clover to get the full benefit of the nitrogen fixing aspect of the legume. But I think after so many years, that's probably almost not even necessary at this point. Although I always, try to hedge my bets. And the rotation thing, that was a huge part of it too. You know, we have enough fields where, you know, every field doesn't have to be in a cash crop vegetable production. So, you know, we were having cover crop there anyway. And then the idea of, well, maybe we could take some of that seed off, you know, harvest that cover crop and, you know, either use it for, you know, eating or for, you know, additional cover crop. Or again, you know, we use it for scratch grain. You can use the scratch grain for chickens, whether you have layers or meat birds or whatnot. So yeah, rotation was a huge, you know, like I just thought it was a nice fit. And I think I've been proven correct that, you know, it has been, you know, just a nice way to break up the veggies and also at the same time get something else out of that growing cycle.
For those that aren't familiar with inoculation, what Mike is talking about there is that it's always a good idea to inoculate your legume with the proper rhizobia inoculant. Rhizobia are the bacteria that invade the legume plant's roots and set up a little factory where they're fixing nitrogen. In exchange, they get carbohydrates from the plant, a nice place to live, and they give the plant and all of us, all of the human system, nitrogen from the air for our plants to grow on. These inoculants are readily available. You just have to make sure that you get the right one. They vary by species, but they're easy to add to the seed, or sometimes you can buy the legume which is already pre-coated with an inoculant. You just have to be careful if you're trying to grow naturally or organically that the inoculant is not genetically modified. Unfortunately, there are some genetically modified inoculants on the market. Next slide.
I have a question for Mike regarding the crimson clover. You ever have any trouble with it combining? Like, we're very concerned.
So
yeah.
No, I hear you. So that there in that picture, I believe, is red clover, which is not going to grow as high as what you just mentioned, Chris, the crimson clover.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. But this is interesting. A friend of mine, and he has a Alice Chalmers all crop combine, and the all crop has a I'm not sure exactly. It's just before the grain goes into the bin, or in my situation, bag, and we'll talk about it. There is a kind of a small seed. It's like an additional screening. And what happened in his case is he had a lot of crimson clover that you just mentioned, and it did get picked up when he was combining, but all of that small seed got separated out in his situation. So he was killing a couple of birds with one stone. I mean, he was getting grain put into the bin, and yet at the same time, he was getting crimson clover seed that was being, you know, put into another actually that stuff goes into a bag because it's a lot less. So you do have to be careful there. That it might get picked up. Your combine may handle it. I'm not sure. My other thought on that would be that sometimes it would actually just get blown out because it's so light. Like I'll have thistle sometimes in the field, which is hard to get rid of. And if it's in, you know, that light fluffy seed stage, none of that, I mean, that all gets blown out in the combining process. You know, it's never a problem in the bag.
Yeah, I hear you there, Mike. We're experts at growing thistles.
So, yeah, I guess, I have had crimson clover in some of my undersowing as well. And it's just beautiful when it does go to flower. And it can definitely happen if the timing is right, that it'll mature the same time as your grains are. So it is something that that's why I generally go with red clover, because it's by mid-July when I'm combining, the clover is there, but it's only a few inches off the ground. So yeah. Good.
Okay,
Thank you.
and next slide.
One question, Elizabeth, if we can take, it's from Ryan. When frost seeding the clover, are you spinning it on by the hand or machine? How durable is winter planted wheat to the trampling?
Yeah, when you're spinning on the frost-seeded red clover, the grain is dormant. You're spinning it on. Here in my area of New York, we would be doing it at the end of February, early March. When do you usually do it? Is that around the same time, Mike?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you want is several weeks of frost and thaw, because
Frost heaving, yeah.
that'll pull that seed into the soil where you'll get real nice contact, and then it eventually will germinate when it warms up, and then it withstands the shade once the grass starts growing, once the grain starts growing. But yeah, I try to. This is interesting too, because our weather's so crazy these days. I try to do it when it is frozen, so it's just not. So you're like, if you wait later in the day and it's thawing, then you can get just slippery, muddy conditions to walk on, and that's no fun.
We'll show you the ideal seeder you can use. It's coming up later in the presentation. One thing to consider when you're yeah, you can advance this to the next slide. Go ahead. Next slide. Yeah, so just to summarize what we've been talking about, there's several reasons to consider growing grains on their farm. We just talked a lot about the agroecological reasons to do that. They build soil health, they break pest and disease cycles, and they're really good for the environment, as opposed, for example, to field corn. There are good economic reasons now. Because of the local food movement, you can make good money growing small grains and related specialty crops. And of course, another thing to think about is, in your region of New Jersey, you used to grow a lot of small grains. So you can, you're well situated. You also have a fantastic double market. You have your local market, and then you have the huge behemoth markets that are never satisfied for these kinds of crops in New York City and Philadelphia. So there's some good reasons to consider growing grains, but we're also going to go to some of the downsides as we go through the presentation. Okay, so I guess we can go to the next slide. What we're going to do now is just take you on a tour of all the possible crops you can grow. And of course, we're starting out with the biggest gun of them all, wheat. And I know Mike is a very experienced wheat grower. So what would you like to say about wheat production?
So, yeah, I mean, I don't see a lot of difference between the wheat, the rye, even spelt, barley,
But for specifically on wheat, do you grow spring or fall planted wheat, Mike?
I'm getting there. So what I was going to say is that your seeding rates are going to differ, but the main thing that has made it possible to, like, when you look at that picture of White Frost Farm there that she has up, That's a nice stand. And I don't see a lot of weeds. My guess is, it looks almost like, what is it? Yeah, whatever variety of wheat that was sown in the fall. And I think that's what you're getting at. All of this stuff is sown in the fall. They're overwintering wheats, and the reason they work is, they can handle our winters, obviously, and they get such a jump on your summer weeds. We will talk about some things you have to sow in the spring, and the opposite is true there, because you're fighting the weeds that want to sprout, that you have in your weed seed bank in your soil, and it's a lot tougher to grow, oats, for example, or some of these spring sown wheats like red fife, which I had done and I actually did okay with a spring sown red fife. But it was really difficult and hard for my psyche, I guess, just to see the field that had plenty of annual weeds that, I'm not talking about, the perennial weeds like the thistle that I had mentioned earlier. But warthog, red fife, those two I've done. I've actually just sowed Redeemer this past about a month ago. Very excited about trying that out. But all of these, again, sown in October, and you get a nice cover, a nice winter cover. It's all green. If you get it in early enough, but not too early, you'll see by the time winter really comes around and you have, when it goes dormant, you don't see a lot of soil. You're not seeing brown, you're seeing green. And that's the goal. So yeah, warthog has been, just really a nice producer, good quality grain. And I'm looking forward to Redeemer. I've never done Glen. We've done other wheat varieties. Like right now I have a white variety. But it's, I don't know what's the name of it. Sorry. But it's more of a
yeah. So what Mike is getting at here, and this is what I would recommend for first time growers, is a fall planted species or variety, either wheat or rye, because as Mike has said, it's easier. First of all, you have a good opportunity to get the ground prepared. And you can, if you get a good stand, you're set as a bulwark against the weeds. So again, you're not for this market. If you use herbicides, you lose a lot of the value of the crop. The consumers want naturally or organically grown grains. However, notice that lovely field of wheat in the middle is spring wheat. So I don't want people to get turned off by spring grains. As Mike said, they're harder to do because they're planted in the spring. So you're constantly battling whether the ground is ready to work, if you get a lot of rain in the spring. But the reason that I bring them up is you can't just grow fall planted crops year after year, because eventually weeds like wild onion and wild garlic and a couple of other really bad weeds will start they will grow in your fall grains. And it's a bad rotation. It's a bad idea because you can run into disease problems. The other reason to grow a spring wheat is that is generally speaking, their protein is much higher. So it's another value addition. So look at Steve Gambino of Villa Milagro winery. He is growing this. This is his first crop ever. he got 45 bushels to the acre, which is a very good yield, and his protein was close to 15%. So
Wow.
he sold that wheat for a lot of money. He grew about that. You see there is the field is between, it's around 3.5 to 4 acres. So I don't think you should neglect the spring grains, but certainly when you're starting it out, it's easier to.
Yeah, if I could comment on just the rotation part of that though, I don't know if it matters. You know, you don't want to follow wheat after wheat after wheat after wheat, whether you do it in the spring or the fall. You got to break that up. So that's, you know.
And you're working with a great rotation, Mike, because you're rotating with vegetables, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so you're in a good position if you wanted to grow fall planted grains the entire time, you have no difficulty. But when you're growing, when you're not growing a lot of vegetables, that's when you can get into difficulty if you continually plant the same grain crop. But let's go on. We're running out of time here a little bit, and we have a lot of other things to talk about. So can we get the next slide? Yeah. So here are some of the ancient wheats. These wheats are different species. They're in the same genus as modern wheat. But they're very high value crops. So for example, here's einkorn. This is one of the most ancient grains available. It grows very well in the Northeast. And this is an interesting crop because every single landrace or variety I've ever tried, you can plant in the spring or the fall. That's amazing. Most wheat varieties are either fall or spring. The great contradiction to that is the heirloom wheat red fife. But this is einkorn being grown in Pennsylvania. It sells for quite a bit of money. Now, one thing about it is that it has to go through an extra step. It must be dehulled. When you put it through a combine, almost all of the hulls remain on the kernels. And we can talk about that a little bit later. Mike, have you grown einkorn?
Yes, and yeah, and you know, the einkorn, the emmer, the spelt, all of which, you know, do retain their hulls. That, you know, that is a kind of a pain, unless you're outfitted. So I was taking my einkorn all the way to middle of Pennsylvania to have a guy help me, you know, get it dehulled.
But now we have, fortunately, the same guy where Mike took it to be dehulled has been manufacturing small scale dehullers. Marksboro Mill now has one. I have one as well at OGRIN, which these tend to be transportable. So I think that problem is much less acute. Let's go on. Mike just mentioned
one other thing about those wheats is that they're particularly good for people with gluten sensitivity. So that's one of their marketability aspects. For some reason, which I'm not sure why, but people who have intolerance or at least sensitivity to gluten can actually handle some of these grains.
Yeah, so let's see the others that Mike mentioned. Here's emmer. This is mainly spring planted. Most of the varieties that are available are spring planted, and this is a great thing to think about if you want to get into spring planting, because it's much more tolerant than wheat for late planting in spring. And it also is much more competitive with weeds. There's a very strong market in New York City for emmer. It is almost completely unprovided for by our local production in the Northeast. So this is a good thing to think about. The next slide, please. Here's spelt. Mike mentioned this as well. Spelt is actually in the same species as wheat, but it's a subspecies, and its claim to fame is that it's very digestible for most people. The exception of always is celiac disease. None of these grains can be eaten by people with celiac. But if you have a digestibility problem with gluten, this is a great grain to grow. It also has a very good market. And there are a number of varieties that are available. This is mainly fall planted, as Mike was saying. You've grown fall spelt, I'm assuming.
Yes, and spring, actually.
And spring spelt. Good for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're modern and heirloom varieties of spelt available, and it's highly marketable. It's a great crop. If you, again, you need to dehull it, and we do have the capability in your area now for dehulling. So those are some of the, let's go on. Here is oats. As Mike mentioned, this is a spring planted crop. There are no fall planted oats in our part of the world. The most marketable variety is the hulless type. And the most preferred hulless type is the Gale variety. This is from Canada. So this is you can see here, this is a lovely field of Gale oats. This is the crop that is easily made into oatmeal because of its hulless state, although there can be an extra cleaning step required.
Yeah. Yeah. I would.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've had problems with, it's not 100% hulless.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Gale variety tends to be the one that with the least hulls remaining.
Ah.
That's one of the reasons that people prefer it, but it also is has better is better productivity in our region than some of the other hulless.
I have a question for you. Is there a hulled variety that you like? And I'll tell you why I'm asking that question. Birds love the Gale.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
And so when I'm growing, let's say a half acre, 3/4 of an acre, not a big field, I really lose a lot to.
That's a very good point, and that's why I always suggest that people put in 2 or more acres of
Yeah.
Gale.
Uh-huh.
There are a number. We're rich in good modern oat varieties because they're great breeding programs for them in Minnesota and North Dakota.
Uh-huh.
So there are a number of great hulled varieties, but it's difficult. The type of dehulling that's necessary for oats is different from the ancient wheats.
Is it?
Yeah. So that makes it that you have to use an impact dehuller for oats versus an abrasion dehuller. So I strongly recommend people stick with the hulless oats.
Right.
Because you don't have that extra step there. But
Right.
oats is one of the best rotation crops in the world. It's even good after other small grains because it's not as susceptible to a disease we're going to talk about in a minute, but it's a lovely crop. But there are some drawbacks because it has to be spring planted, and it can sometimes be challenging. Let's keep going. Next slide. Yeah, so here's rye. Mike mentioned rye. Rye is one of the crops that I would recommend if you're starting out because all rye is fall planted. We don't have any spring rye. We can't grow spring rye in this area. And before Mike talks about it, rye is an underappreciated crop. I tend to think of it only as sort of rye bread, and we confuse the taste of rye with caraway seed. But if you just have rye as a cooked grain, you'd be surprised, or you can use it as a rye flour in desserts. It has a lovely, it's a delicate flavor, very floury. And you can see we did a blind tasting where people didn't know what they were tasting, just of cooked grains. So cooking it as you would rice. We did this with Slow Food Pittsburgh. And you can see there that rye, people like, of all the grains, the rye was the most flavorful as a cooked grain. So it's really a lovely grain. It's also used in the beverage industry a lot, so you can sell rye to microbreweries and so forth. But Mike, why don't you tell us your
I was going to
experience?
say that this is eye-opening to me to see that it was more flavorable than barley and or the wheat. The trick with rye that I've had over the years is lodging. Rye generally grows very tall, and you get some either rain or even just heavy dews. And when that stuff, when the grain heads are getting heavy, it can start to kind of fall over. And once that starts, it's almost like this chain reaction. And so what I realized was that I probably my seeding density was too high. And as I have backed off and sowed fewer seeds per acre, I'm finding that I'm having less trouble with lodging, where the grain just falls down and gets down the ground. It's possible you can still pick that up with your combine when it's time to harvest, but it's very difficult. And depending on the weather, you can, if you have a bunch of grains that are down on the ground, you can start to get molds and stuff like that. So your seeding density does come into play, I think, or at least that's what I have found with the lodging problem in rye. But yeah, it's
Okay.
it's one of my favorite cover crops too.
Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So completing our big four of the small grains is barley. Barley comes in spring and fall planted types, hulled and hulless types, and it's used a lot in the malting industry, but it also can be used as an edible grain. So a gentleman I'm not sure he's on this in this class, but he's a little bit further south than most of you. He's started growing fall planted malting barley, and he's having some good success with it. So it's a wonderful crop. There are a number of commercial varieties available. And if you're interested in it's difficult to sometimes meet the malting market standards, but the gentleman that's growing it in New Jersey, for example, is using it to make his own beer, so that's not a problem. But if you're interested in barley, we can certainly help you find a good variety. Did you want to say anything about this, Mike?
Well, that's the problem that I've had, is finding a seed source for barley,
Okay.
a hulless barley.
Yeah.
So I need help there too.
Okay. All right. Next slide.
Just really quick before we move on, we did have a question. Mike, what is your rye seed density?
Right. So it ends up being around 75 to 80 pounds
Per acre.
per acre. Yeah, which is, I think I was closer to 120 maybe before, but really, cut it back. And it, yeah. So around 75 pounds an acre.
Okay, rounding out I mentioned that the small grains are very different from corn in terms of their environmental benefits, and that's true. But because of the market, there is a big market, a huge market that's never filled for specialty corn. And as an agronomist and agroecologist, I think if you have that in your rotation occasionally, and it's done on a small acreage, and especially if you interseed, which we can talk about if you're interested later, specialty corn certainly can be part of your rotation, and a valuable one. So specialty corns include heirloom corns like Wapsie Valley, which is pretty easy to grow actually. And then really interesting heirloom varieties like Bloody Butcher, which grows about 12 feet tall and can have it's often a double cobber. You can see it's beautiful, and it's in high demand, as you can imagine, by millers and others. Then popcorn is also a great option. So small acreages of these specialty corns would certainly work for you in your rotation. Have you grown any of this, Mike?
So we grow popcorn, and we actually do grow Anostin dent is a grain corn that we've grown. But the thing I would say about it is, the combine we have cannot do corn. You need a separate, you need a combine that you can change your head. So it's not going to be the same kind of harvest that you have with your grains.
Yeah, that's a good
So,
point.
Totally
And
different.
you also need to cultivate. Corn is a row crop. As you've been seeing with the grains, they're dense plantings. So they're either drilled in very narrow rows or they're broadcast. Whereas corn is this kind of corn would be grown at 30 or 30, even 36 inches rows. And that means that you have to get rid of the weeds. And so a cultivation is necessary.
If I could also add, I've had great success with flame.
With you use a flame weeder. Oh, good for you.
Yeah, and corn can really handle some heat. If you're spraying at the base of the plant, you can
Are
really
you using a handheld flamer or is it a tractor mounted?
both.
Okay, yeah.
If
I've
you
done
can-
tractor mounted flame weeding, and Mike is absolutely correct. It's great as long as you're wearing something that keeps your back from getting too hot.
Actually, your back will freeze because the tank freezes up as you go. Yeah, you do have to watch where the flame goes, but with a handheld, you can go in when the crop is quite tall and still clean up weeds that aren't too high and not do any damage to the corn plant itself. So you can really have a very clean field if you time it right.
Okay, and you can also do mechanical cultivation.
Which we do as well.
Yeah. So next slide.
Sorry, just real quick before we move on, I see we have two folks with their hands up. So why don't we go to Alex B and then Lenny for your questions real quick. Feel free to unmute yourself, you guys, and go ahead and ask.
Oh, I think my hand might be up by mistake. Hi, everyone. Sorry. It's Alex B here. Hi.
Okay.
Hi, Alex.
Question.
Hi.
Thank you. And Lenny, did you have something you wanted to add?
No question. Sorry.
Okay, so let's go on to the next slide, please.
Okay, thanks.
So I just wanted to round off with some, there are many more diverse grains you can grow. You can see that we have several millet species that will grow in our area: pearl millet, proso millet, and finger millet. Pearl millet and proso millet they're not extensive acreages grown, but they have a good potential market. Finger millet, we're going to be experimenting with that. I've been working in Kenya where it's a staple crop. We certainly should be able to grow it, and it would sell very well. Sorghum is another crop that can be grown, as well as teff. Teff is grown extensively in the Northwest part of the country. Of course, it's from Ethiopia originally, and it's a incredibly nutritious grain. The only problem with it is that the seed is so tiny that we'd have to retrofit the combine with a different screen in order to harvest it.
How about the millets? Can you just harvest them with the typical?
Yeah, they're bigger. They're not huge seeds, but I've had farmers grow them with, have harvesting with an all crop.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Okay.
So that keep there are lots and lots of different grains or grasses you can grow in our region. In the interest of time, I'm going to go on to some of the specialty crops. Okay. But first, I want to make this distinction. It's going to become important when we talk about disease prevention between monocots and dicots. Maybe you all are familiar with this, but just to be sure, all the grains you just saw are grasses. They come from one huge family, and they're all monocots. And you can see on that little picture on the left is a spike of a grass coming up, and it's got just one seed leaf. So that's what you see when it comes out of the ground, is just that one seed leaf. Whereas monocots have two seed leaves. So think of the bean plant. It comes out of the ground and twang, two fat seeds, the cotyledons, spread out across the ground. And what I'm going to show you now are some pseudo cereals, some pseudo grains that are dicots. So let's start out by looking at them. Next slide. Okay, so one of the most famous is buckwheat. Buckwheat is, the great thing about buckwheat is that it's planted at a different time of year. It's very frost sensitive when it first comes out of the ground. So you've got to wait till well after the last frost date. In fact, in some cases you can plant it, end of June. It's summer planted. That's a great thing for your rotation because it gives you some diversity in when you're tilling. It can be used it's mostly grown, I would say, as a cover crop, but it's a great cash crop. It produces very nice, we call it a grain. It's actually a seed that makes fantastic flour. It's an excellent rotation crop, and it's a terrific weed and pest fighter. So it's something to think about. It's a way to diversify your rotation, either using it as a cover crop or as a cash crop. And I'm sure Mike has grown buckwheat.
Yeah, and I asked you at the field day, when do you harvest?
Yeah, buckwheat is, but the only difficult thing about buckwheat is harvesting it. And that's one of the reasons it's difficult to harvest, is because it's an indeterminate crop. It's like an indeterminate tomato plant. It just keeps growing and producing seed. So the general rule of thumb is you wait till about 75 to 85% of the grain has turned brown. And that's when you go for it.
Right.
So harvesting can also be difficult if you try to straight combine it. It can be done, but it can also be more easily done by first windrowing it with a special machine, and then to let it dry down, and then pick it up with a pickup head on a combine.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to the next one. Now, flax. I've grown a lot of flax. Flax is it's another pseudo cereal. These are called pseudo cereals. They're dicots. They're not remotely related to the grasses, but you manage them in a similar fashion. And in the case of buckwheat, you use it for flour, just like you would a small grain. Flax is a wonderful crop. It's one of the most beautiful in the world.
Yeah.
With those blue flowers. It's spring planted. You plant it just as you would oats or spring wheat or spring barley. It has excellent market potential in the Northeast because not many people are growing it. And one of the reasons not many people are growing it is that it's a very non-competitive plant. So you can see this is a lovely stand that Kit Kelly got in PA, and you don't see any weeds in it. That's very unusual. It can be done, or you can also interseed it. You can interseed it with a legume, and that can really help keep the weeds at bay. But if anybody is interested in flax, let me know. There's some good seed sources from the Midwest, and you can grow either a brown flax or a golden flax variety. Next slide. Here's grain amaranth. This is one of my favorite crops. I grew it in Minnesota. And it's tall. It's a real showstopper. People would stop on the sides of the road as it started to head out. Again, it's summer planted, which is great for your rotation. And it has really good market potential. Again, it's a very small seed, and that's what can cause some problems in harvesting. Otherwise, it grows like topsy, and there are lovely different varieties that you can grow. So it's something to think about.
You could harvest that with your combine as well?
Yep. Yeah. But you do have to get a different screen because it's so small seeded.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, so now let me talk about Mike and I'll talk about some supplementary players here. We've been talking about these. So there on the top, this is from the legume family, which is one of the other great crop plant families that without which we would not make it. So you can see across the top, red clover, crimson clover, alfalfa, yellow sweet clover. There are other forage legumes you can grow. These are the great end-fixing species that also can be great for animal feed as well. And then on the bottom, we have soybeans and then dry beans, some varieties of dry beans. And these again are dicots. The legumes, as you can see, can be interseeded in the grains, either frost seeded into fall planted grains, or they can be planted at the same time as spring planted grains. You can usually do this in one pass if your planter has a grass box. So they're pretty easy to grow in your grains. And the reason I put the soybean and the dry beans is these are excellent rotation crops in a grain rotation that they're great cash crops, and they also are doing good work in terms of preventing disease from building up. So I think that's we're through some of the crops that you can grow in your region and that you can market readily. But now we want to get into a very important topic that actually Mike brought up, and that is sometimes, as you've heard him say, sometimes he has difficulty finding seed. So one thing to keep in mind is you can't just grow, or I do not advise growing just any variety. The markets are very specific in what they like usually. So the millers in our region really prefer varieties you've heard Mike mention. Warthog, Redeemer is another fall wheat. Gale, they really like the Gale oats. Unfortunately, all those are Canadian varieties, and we can't buy certified seed from the companies that own them. They won't sell them to us,
Wow.
which is they won't sell them to us because they want to protect they're worried that once we get the variety, we'll start growing it without buying more certified seed. And of course, by telling us we can't buy it, they of course force us to do exactly what they're
Do exactly that, yeah. Yeah.
The ancient wheats and the land races and the heirloom seeds are usually not available from seed companies. So for example, I can't think of a seed company where you can go and buy einkorn. And Emmer I can think of only one seed company where you can buy it. The result is that very often we have to rely on what is called farm seed or bin run seed. That is, we have to source seed from other farmers and then save it and replant it if we want to grow some of these varieties. Next slide. So, here, what I always recommend is if you can buy certified seed, you should do it, because it's gone through a very good, it's one of the good things about the USDA, about our agricultural system. It's pure. That what you're buying is what you're buying. It can't be sold if it's contaminated with weed seed. It's free of chaff and other debris. So it's really a good thing. But as I said, a lot of the varieties that the markets are interested in, we can't get certified seed. So farm seed is what we have to rely on it, but it can be impure. It can be contaminated with weed seeds, and you need to test the germination. And a good rule of thumb is when you're buying farm seed, buy it from somebody you know and trust. Mike, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I mean, the farm seed, is really also another big positive in my way of looking at things, in that I could grow my own seed, and over time, hopefully those seeds would be more acclimated to our place, our locale. But you're right, you have to be careful on what you're sowing. Most of the stuff that I resow, you can see that it's clean, and you don't, and I know the problems that I have A big problem for me, for example, is vetch, hairy vetch. Hairy vetch is a legume cover crop that I've used forever, but hairy vetch has what they call hard seed, so it becomes a weed, and it persists in your soil the way amaranth seed or a pigweed seed is going to stay in the soil for years. And then, it'll grow up the same time as your wheat crop, for example, and then, it's in your bin, and can be a little bit hard to get out sometimes. Not impossible at all, but it's big enough you can see it. So, if I was to sell someone, let's say, some rye seed, it would not have vetch in it. I'd make sure it would be so that, if you're buying seed from someone else, Elizabeth is totally right. It's good to know them, and, you just have to be confident of the quality of the stuff that you're putting on your farm.
That's this helping you find seed is one thing that the Grains Project can really do. It's something that OGRIN has done for many, many years for farmers, just because the need is there.
Yeah.
So it can be an issue, but it's something that we've found ways to solve. Next slide. So now let's talk about, so you need to get the right variety to meet the market demand. Let's talk about some of the other requirements for small grain production. I am not a proponent of trying to grow grains without mechanization. It's very difficult to do. My father showed me how to scythe, and he said, I scythed as a young farmer in the Ukraine, but when the combine became available, no farmer in his right mind wanted to scythe anymore.
It's hard.
So, because it's not just scything it, then you somehow got to thresh the grain.
Yeah.
People 2,000 years ago spent most of their lives threshing grain. So that's why, I think what you should be thinking about if you're interested in working with us is an acre or more of land, because you're going to need to use equipment on it, which we're about to get to. This ground should be loamy soil, not heavy clay or not light sand, a well-drained soil. You're going to need to soil test it, and we'll help you determine what those soil tests mean. And of course, it's always good to be on flattish or gentle slopes rather than steep slopes. And one of the things the project can do is come out and take a look at your fields that you're interested in grain production on, and give you some advice on whether they're suitable. Next slide. Again, we've talked about this a little bit. For our market, to get those prices that we started out with, you need to use regenerative or organic management practices. The market is not interested in conventionally grown grain. So that means in terms of fertility, you're relying on those nitrogen fixing forage legumes, manures and composts, cover crops, as Mike has talked about. You might have to use lime to get your pH up. But it's not at all the same as just conventional agriculture, where you're really only using bagged commercial fertilizers. In terms of pest and disease management, the same thing is true. Prevention and cultural practices take top billing. And there are some NOP stands for the National Organic Program. There's some NOP approved products that you can use if needed, but that's what the other thing that the Grain Project can help you with is learning some prevention and cultural practices that can really help you avoid pests and diseases and hold the weeds back. So, Mike, did you want to say anything here?
Well, I've never had a problem with pests except for the birds, or really disease. And I guess, I go back to the rotation thing, I think that it just makes a huge difference in, keeping those at bay. My guess is that you have more problems when you're following, the same with same.
Right,
Seems
yeah,
like just not yeah, so I don't know what, NOP approved products you would need for any kind of grains, but
yeah.
you
I,
know,
c- I find farmers occasionally applying them for things like powdery mildew, but
Yeah.
that's a very unusual circumstance. And
Yeah.
we can talk about it if anyone's interested. There's a disease that's much more prevalent than that.
Yeah,
Um,
weeds are gonna be the bigger
bigger
issue.
issue, yeah. Next slide, please. So, one thing about disease that we want to say up front is there's one disease you really have to watch out for. It's fusarium, or scab or head blight. Many grasses are hosts of fusarium, and unfortunately, wheat, rye, and barley are major hosts of this disease. Corn is also a strong host of this disease. Oat is a weak host, and that's why it's better for rotating. The problem with fusarium is that not so much that it causes yield loss, it can, but if in certain circumstances, the organism, the fungi in this case, can cause vomitoxin to grow in the grain. And that if the vomitoxin content of the grain is too high, it loses its marketability. Humans and animals cannot eat it without getting sick. So that's something that we have to worry about every year, especially in wheat, rye, and barley. And the major management tool, there are several, but the one I want to focus on is crop rotation. Notice that Mike is rotating vegetables with grasses. This particular species, this particular organism can't grow in vegetable crops. So he has a wonderful rotation. You heard him say he's not having many disease problems. The rule of thumb is do not follow wheat, barley, or rye with themselves or each other. Preferably follow it with follow any of the small grains with a dicot. When you do that, you avoid this disease. Is the risk still there? Yes, but it's considerably reduced.
Are wet years, yeah, does weather, have a lot to do with fusarium at all?
Yes, it can, because when the disease enters the plant at flowering through the flowers, and so if we have very heavy rains during that period, and we can, then the risk of fusarium is higher.
Ah.
But there are several other management practices that also help to it exists on the residues of the crops. So one thing that is always good to do is to bury that residue before planting another grain. But the best thing to do is to not plant grain after a small grain after a small grain.
Right.
If you do get fusarium, you don't need to panic immediately. It doesn't always form vomitoxin. So you may just have some yield loss. And even if it does form vomitoxin, there are some measures that can reduce the vomitoxin in the grain to an acceptable level. So it's something to always be concerned about and to always test for. Your markets will always require that's the farmer's responsibility, is to test for vomitoxin. But if you use good rotation, your risk is much, much lower. Next slide. Yeah, so another requirement for our market is high quality. So we've talked about some of this, but I just want to reiterate, you need to use the varieties that are sought by the market, and you need to meet the market requirements. For example, there's a limit of 1 part per million for vomitoxin. And then you may also have to meet a protein requirement or a falling number requirement. A falling number requirement, that's a test for sprouting in the head, and good management will keep that falling number in an acceptable level for the markets. Another way to keep high quality is to practice good sanitation. And all the farmers that I know that are selling into these markets are very careful when they're moving it to avoid contamination, dirt, etc. And then when they're storing the grain, to make sure that pests are not invading the grain, or that rodents are not able to get access to it. So all of those things have to be worried about to meet the high quality standards of our market. Last thing, and probably this is on the minds of a lot of you, and I talked about equipment. You do have to have some equipment. A tractor is essential. And as a tractor with a front end loader is the front end loader is very useful here. So Mike, do you want to talk about horsepower, just sort of generally about horsepower requirements for the tractor?
So that looks like an all crop.
Yeah.
Orange, yeah, that orange combine there, tractor pulled. He's driving probably 35, 40 horsepower tractor there, which seems adequate. My tractor's a little bigger than that. And I do have, like a Ford NAA, which is like a 35 horsepower tractor. I'm sure it can do it, but when you're combining and your bin's getting full, the whole machine gets heavy. So that's, depending on your slope and things like that, moisture conditions and whatnot,
What's your tractor's horsepower that you use for combining?
probably for that at least 85.
Okay, yeah.
It's
Yeah, and we can give you more advice on this. It kind of depends on what equipment you're using and the variables that Mike has just outlined.
one thing that also is important is your ability to make adjust your speed, because you can have a tractor that doesn't go slow enough, that you're taking in too much material too fast and your combine just can't handle it. So to either have enough gears that you can go slow enough if you have to, so that you don't overwhelm. Like my combine is an antique, and so I have to be careful with how hard I push it, or else things are going to break.
Yeah, and you notice that we're talking very much about the combine here. The combine is your best friend. It does several things for you. It cuts the grain and it threshes the grain and it gathers the threshed grain together for you, so you're able to then move it to where you need to move it. People think that the combine is the piece of equipment that's going to cost them the most. That's not true. It's not true for a bad reason. The bad reason is that no small scale combines have been manufactured in the United States since the 70s. So you're going to be dealing with used combines. There are two possibilities. You can get a pull behind that's you move with a tractor, or something that's self-propelled. You can see the Dietz combine there on the right. These machines are used, and that's bad in the sense that you have to, they've had a lot of them have had a lot of wear. They may not have been stored properly. So buying a used combine, we can help you with that. We have a little checklist you can go through, but the price is often lower than you think it will be. So for some of the pull behind combines, the price can go as low as $500, and it can go up to, it can go up to any amount, but it's usually in the range of $500 to $1,500. And what you have to be careful there is to make sure that it's in working condition, or it's relatively easily repaired. The self-propelled can be more expensive, but not as expensive as you think. So for example, somebody in your area there in New Jersey, I remember, got one for $2,000 a couple of years ago. Our project is buying a combine that will allow people to use in a certain area. And we're looking in the price range of $2,000 to $3,000. So you can start off with a pull behind for around $500 to $1,000 generally. Mike, do you have any other?
But I would say if it's that cheap, you're definitely gonna have to work on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, you could probably pick something up for 1,000 maybe, but like these machines are old. There are places in them where water can sit. So you often have rusted out metal. You know, I've had to replace concaves and, you know, had to do a lot of welding and things like that to get mine, you know, going again after, you know, metal just kind of wore through. So, you know, just beware that, you know, if you're saving money up front, you're probably going to be working on that machine for sure.
Yeah, and I think any farmer will tell you as you're during the season, during the harvest season, you'll generally have to be stopping and doing some repair, maybe going and getting a part. But anyway, again, we can help you with that, and we are going to have available a combine for people's use, which I think will be very helpful. Next slide. So a combine is essential, either to be able to borrow one or best have your own or get the one from the project, because combining there's a small window of opportunity for each crop if you want to keep the quality high. Let's just talk a little bit about tillage. You don't need all these pieces of equipment, but you do if you're coming out of sod or you're coming out of hay land, you will need to moldboard plow. Sometimes you can borrow one. You can buy used moldboard plows. Other things that are nice to have, you can see the disc harrow there for secondary tillage. It's a spring tooth harrow on the bottom with the truck in the background. That's nice for doing a final pass, or sometimes burying small seeded cover crops. And then that cultipacker at the bottom is also very valuable. These are all pieces of used equipment. The cultipacker can really help you get good seed to soil contact, especially if you're broadcasting the seed. But even when you're drilling, I often recommend once over with the cultipacker. So next slide. This gets into what Mike was talking about. How do you plant? Well, a lot of farmers use a grain drill. That's going to give you, you don't have to use as much seed then, because it's much more precise. You're seeding in rows anywhere from 6 to 8 inches apart. But you can also spin the seed on, as Mike was talking about. You can spin on not only can you spin on legume seed when you're frost seeding, but you can spin on these small grains. The only thing you have to do then is somehow incorporate them, because they need to be at least 3/4 of an inch in the ground, and then they need to have good seed to soil contact. But this little spin seeder, that costs about $30. It's a handheld model, but you can easily, it's pretty easy because it has it will spin out the seed on either side of you to quite some distance. You can easily seed a 2-acre field with just a handheld. You can also get tractor mounted spin seeders. Mike, did you want to have anything to say here?
Just with the drill, you know, and like, you know, we have an old Oliver antique drill that has metal, you know, big metal wheels. We outfitted it so it could be picked up by the tractor with a 3-point hitch. So it does a decent job at laying the seed into the ground. And I've found too that, you know, there can be trash on the field, as in, you know, organic trash, stems and things like that. And it still gets the seed into the ground. But I always pull a cultipacker behind it. The cultipacker, I find, really does a great job of really firming the seed in the ground to get that good soil to seed contact. So generally our stands are always pretty good.
And that's the first thing. We'll be talking about that in the next webinar a lot, the seed bed preparation and planting the seed. That's where your crop stands or falls. If you can get a good stand of the crop, your problems will be minimal. So we'll be talking a lot about that. The other thing to know is that the project is also buying a grain drill that will make available to folks as you get started, if you're interested in starting to grow these grains. Okay, so next slide.
Real quick question related to this. What tools do you use after the spin seeder?
Yeah, you have to incorporate the seed a bit. So you can use a harrow, a spike tooth harrow, a spring tooth harrow. You can even use a disc harrow if you know what you're doing. But then after that, you need to come over it with a cultipacker, because it's the soil, the seed will get incorporated, but it won't have good seed to soil contact. These, just like the combines, I mean, you can buy new harrows, but mostly people rely on used equipment for tillage. Here we go. We want to end the presentation, and then we'll be happy to take more questions with what the Foodshed Alliance Grains Project, how we can help you if you want to get going growing some of these crops. We can give you a lot of agronomic support. So with farm visits, consultations, this education series that's going to continue over the next couple of years. There's a grain manual that will be available by the end of the year, how to so we can help you source equipment and inputs, and we can also lend equipment. So for example, Manish has already bought a moisture meter. I think we'll get another one that's very critical and really help you out when you're at harvest, when you're trying to determine whether you need to dry your grain. We will have a combine and a grain drill that you can use. Next slide. We also will help you. This year we're concentrating on production, but we also will help you with processing. Processing is all post-harvest, but it's very important, and it includes cleaning seed. And very often as a farmer, you're going to need to clean your seed. So we have processing support through Marksboro Mills and River Valley Community Grains. They have a variety of seed cleaners, both air screen and centrifugal force cleaners. They've got a dehuller, an oat roller, and some mills, and we'll be talking about that more next year. And there'll be an educational series on that. Next slide. The big thing for all of you is that we do also provide marketing support. This is really critical. And that you have an opportunity to market through River Valley Community Grains and Marksboro Mills. We can also connect you to other markets, and we're going to have an educational series on marketing grains. And if you need for more information, as Manish said, you should contact him to get going with us, or if you need specific pieces of information. So next slide. Yeah, so we want to tell you, coming up next Wednesday evening is another webinar with 3 farmers now, which is great. And it's all about planting your first crop, walking you through that, giving you some good advice, I think, from these farmers. Tom Zeng is a very experienced grain grower, and Ryan and Liz have just planted their first Redeemer crop, which is looking good. So they'll have lots to tell you. And then we've had to reschedule. I think it's going to be December 7th. We'll be putting out more information on that. Don't miss this one. This is with Tor Oshner, who's a phenomenal grain grower near Ithaca, New York, and he will take you through combine basics and an introduction to post-harvest handling. He's really an expert. These are free and open to everybody. So we hope you'll take advantage. A little bit about the Foodshed Alliance. You can see the Foodshed Alliance works to strengthen sustainable farming. And it's trying to help everybody access local healthy food, protect the environment, and trying to build a local resilient food economy. And they're wonderful people to work with. I've been just delighted to be involved in this grain project that they've put together. So with that, we do have some time for more questions.
So Elizabeth, there's one question which we have been holding back for some time. This is, what management practices minimize ergot? We had some this year in the field.
Okay, ergot is another disease that's very serious in small grains. It can occur in any of them, but it's always associated with rye, but I've seen it plenty of wheat and barley. And it's caused by another pathogen. And in this case, rotation is extremely important. And also, if your crop is contaminated with it, you have to put it through a very good cleaning process, because this is the one that can cause very severe illness in people. People remember the Salem witch trials and some of the craziness that was exhibited by those young girls that got the whole thing going. It's thought that they were perhaps poisoned by ergot. So that's a very important thing to watch out for. And in the next, because you brought it up, in the next series, I'll show you what it looks like. It's easily spotted in the head. I have not seen it be a big problem in our region. I think that's because we're getting clean seed, and also people are doing good rotations.
It's seed borne.
No, I don't think so. I have to look up the disease, the pathology.
Right.
But what it will do is it's extremely poisonous to people. So, and there is an FDA standard for it, but luckily I rarely see it in most of most of the grain, most of the farmers that I work with.
Can you describe it?
It's what happens is again the pathogen enters the flour, and instead of a grain forming in the head, forget the name of the body that it forms, but it looks like a purple, enlarged purple grain.
Yeah.
And it's easily seen.
Yeah.
But it's very easily seen. And contaminated grain is a no-no with that. As I said, there are some seed cleaning processes that can clean it out, but the better thing is to be using a rotation that can avoid it.
Right. Cool.
I'll show you some slides of it next Wednesday for those of you that are going to be watching that.
Cool.
Other questions?
Chris, who asked that question about the ergot, I see you have your hand raised. Do you want to jump in with
Yeah,
that?
I'm just kind of on a rave. Like our local co-op actually purchased a color sorter for like the tune of about $300,000, so they could move it because there was that much concern about it. And like we have had it for the first time, and you know, the joke running is, who wants to buy it? Because apparently it's used to make LSD. But it's, you can pick it out by hand, but some of the pieces of it are actually in the weed seeds. We have a blackgrass outbreak as well, and the blackgrass can host it. And the blackgrass seeds are really small, so you know it requires like extra cost to remove it. And I did a little background research on it, but I intend to become an expert this winter. But there's 2 stages to it. It makes this, you've probably seen it in the field. There's a fungus that grows sort of like a mushroom. It looks like a tiny little stalk about 1 inch tall with a ball on the end. and it comes out of the organic matter in the spring. So we've been trying to raise our soil carbon content diligently, and unwittingly we're kind of creating this perfect overwintering environment for the ergot, apparently. And that ball is the fruiting body that releases the spores that gets into the grain, infects the grain when it's starting to flower. And it again, I'm not an expert, I'm just babbling, but
Yeah, no, yeah. So some of the management practice that can help, as I said, is rotating out of cereals for at least 1 year, preferably 2. Burying the crop residue is very good. And let me come back to that in a second, because people are always worried about, you know, having a bare field. Cleaning the seeds to remove the ergot, which is possible, as you said, but can sometimes be difficult. And also keeping the area around the field clean of grasses, of wild grasses that can harbor it. Yes, especially mowing grasses like that before they flower, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because then they can't form they can't get infected. But
wow, thank you.
You know, yeah. So one of the things about that people worry about is the tillage. You saw all those tillage implements, right? And people are always worried about moldboard plowing, which you don't have to do every year by any means, but sometimes is sometimes essential, especially for perennial weed control and organic systems. And the other tillage, and you know, for example, burying these crop debris, right? But what we found is, we did a long-term, I used to be a researcher at the University of Minnesota, and there was a long-term experiment that contrasted, for example, a 4-year organic rotation with a 2-year conventional corn soybean rotation. And the corn soybean rotation used reduced tillage. The organic system could not do that, right? But we were monitoring soil health. We were monitoring a lot more than just the fertility. We were monitoring the physical characteristics of the soil. And what we found was, even though we were moldboard plowing once every 4 years, the soil health in the organic system was much better than the conventional system because of the other practices that we were engaging in, which means that we were building up soil organic matter in that cycle. So the soil organic matter was the practices that we were using other than moldboard plowing and tillage cultivation for weed control were making sure that our soil health was actually better than in a reduced tillage system. So that's something that farmers should take to heart. If you're really working on cover cropping, using manures and composts, not removing the residue of the crop, leaving that in place, or if you're taking it to use with your animals, putting it back on the land, then even if you're moldboard plowing every 3 to 4 years and using tillage to control weeds, your soil health is going to be excellent.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for this wonderful explanation. There's a question from Ryan before I talk about it. For new farmers who are interested in growing grains, do we have any questions around it? If any question, please feel free. No question is small or less important. Please feel free to ask a question. So we'll take Ryan's question. It's a very interesting question. And I think, Ryan, you need to get this book, The One Straw Revolution by Masanobu. Is a Japanese farmer and an agronomist, written way back in the 60s and 70s. It's a very ancient book, but amazing. And that answers this question very interestingly, but I'll leave it to Elizabeth and Mike to take it. I'll read the question for you, Elizabeth. We are interested in grazing small animals in between wheat, rye plantings for a year after harvest. Is plant this fall harvest wheat in 25 and plant cover graze animal 26 and plant fall wheat, is that enough to break disease cycles? What should we plant as a cover grazing crop, or is frost seeded into wheat clover enough?
Yeah, that's an excellent question.
Yeah.
One thing that I would applaud is what they're talking about is a mixed farming system, which is one of the most sustainable in the world, anywhere in the world. And that is a system that incorporates crops and animals and uses them together. There's tremendous synergy there, and that's fantastic. I suspect that if you what are you thinking about, Ryan? Are you, so let's say you've harvested off, let's say you frost seeded the red clover into the Redeemer wheat, you harvest off the wheat in July. And then are you just going to let the animals graze in that area? Is that your idea?
So I'm thinking, and obviously if you have a better idea, certainly let me know. But basically we're thinking harvest in July and then establish some kind of cover crop that is grazable. And either letting that grow for a little bit, or we can put some kind of animal, maybe laying hens or the turkeys on it for a couple months, but then also letting it rest the whole winter and the whole next summer. So basically we're going to set up.
So it's 2 years.
Yeah. And then we're planting the following fall.
Yeah, it's
That's
actually only a year, but it's yeah, you know, and it kind of depends on what you want to plant there. There's some dicot, you know, there's some mixtures that you could do of a grass and a dicot. That would certainly be a good rotation. What you want to avoid is having the small grain stubble still, but it sounds like you're going to be planting, right? So you would incorporate the small grain stubble and then do another planting. I think that would be fine. The other question that was sort of implied there, is it enough? Let's say you if you have your Redeemer and then you frost seed, so you've got red clover there, you harvest the Redeemer, the red clover is growing like topsy. Is that can you then go back and plant rye or wheat or another small grain the following fall? That's a bad idea because you won't have done any tillage. So the small grain, the remnants of the small grain crop are going to be still there. And you know, you'll prepare your seed bed, but you're still have increased risk of fusarium there. So, but the other option that you're talking about of establishing some kind of grazing crop, that would be a very reasonable rotation.
Okay. Yeah, the idea is to set up 2 3 to 4 acre plots. You know, 1 year during the growing season in the spring would be, you know, the previous fall planted wheat, and then the other field would be resting and being grazed to break the cycle and also put down nutrients. And
Right.
that
Yeah.
fall. So we kind of go back and forth between 2 fields.
Yeah. And we can talk about some things you could be planting as grazing crops that might even include some, you know, some grasses, but
Right.
but are going to be weak hosts for fusarium. So
And easy to till as well, so I don't have to moldboard plow every.
yeah. No, with that system you wouldn't have to moldboard plow. No.
Okay.
Every year. Absolutely not. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
But the really cool thing that I love, Ryan, is the fact that you're incorporating your animal production into your crop production. That is the height of sustainability.
Well, thank you much. That and we don't want to grow vegetables, so
Okay.
it's just too much hard work.
Don't blame me there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Guys, also think about vegetables in terms of field crop vegetables. So one of the great rotations in Maine is a grain with potatoes, right? And squash, a field of squash or pumpkins is a phenomenal rotation crop for grains. So this, you can really think outside the box. And that, of course, is highly marketable as well.
So we have a very interesting question, and which is from our friend Gordon, and he is asking, how can I connect to someone who is doing any kind of work in the above mentioned, such as planting, harvesting the cover crop, or even small grains, that I can come and work or help to get some experience in person, and then I can get back to my land and practice. And also in the process, I would like to learn about the equipments, how to operate them.
Yeah, that's a great question. Mike, do you have any ideas? Or I have some things, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, you would, basically have to hook up with a farmer and ingratiate yourself with them, and so that they'll allow you to come and help. I used to put someone on the back of the combine when we first started, because my combine actually is not a bin; it's a bag system. So we have to change bags every row typically, and we stopped doing it because it was so dusty and loud and just terrible. So I started just doing it on my own because it was just not a good spot for another person. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible to also be helpful. And typically it's when it's harvest time in particular, it can be quite hectic depending on the weather. You're rushing to get stuff in before rain sometimes. So it's that can be difficult for a farmer to have someone around, helping. But
on the other hand, Mike, for operations like planting and doing field prep work in the before a fall planting, that's the time when actually someone could be very useful. So for example, when I've planted before, sometimes it's advisable to have somebody on the back of the planter making sure that the seed is dispensing properly, and helping to calibrate the drill and things like that.
right.
So Gordon, I think that's something that we could help you with. We could help you find some farmers. As Mike says, there are certain times when it's pretty tense, but start out by coming to this combine in person, because there you're going to meet a lot of farmers, and the instructor is one of the best I know. And you start out with experiences like that, and you can grow from them. It is an art. Every one of these farmers has learned from experience. There's no course you can take that. Yeah. So I think we can give you some opportunities to get your feet wet working with other folks.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, because only right on the field can learn practice and those things. Just like swimming, right? You're not going to the ground, above ground to learn swimming. You just need to dip your head into the water.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And that's a good question, and a solid one, because for example, this Tor Oshner, he takes on young folks. Usually he's very close to Cornell and Ithaca, and so people will come and they have no experience, and he gets them started on and they become experts after 3 or 4 years, of course. So
And hey,
yeah.
Gordon, you need
Yeah.
to send Kent to the farm, okay?
Sorry?
You need to send Kent, not you.
Now the thing is, I know you are the organizer. I can help you. I can do the research, basically to help you to set up a system, have a calendar for everyone. So whoever say, I'm going to make a plan something tomorrow or next week, they announced there, so other people whoever interested, oh, let's jump in. You know, I want to come or see
Thank
or
you.
learn
Thank you. Thank you, Gordon. I appreciate you. Any other questions, guys? This has been a great interactive session. We have 9 minutes. And one thing we keep hearing Thor Oshner and Ethika, but this program, which Thor will talk about Combine and how to use Combine, will be at Marksboro Mill in Blairstown, not at Ethika. So he has agreed to come down, and Elizabeth and both Thor would be here to explain the working of Combine and other harvesting techniques.
Yeah, that should be good. But next week will be very, very good as well. We've got several farmers that are going to be speaking, and I think people can learn a lot in a short amount of time. So the other thing to keep in mind is if you're interested in getting started, now's the time to request a field visit. It's not, before the weather gets really bad. I can come out. I'm an experienced agronomist, and take a look, talk to you about what you want to do. So if you're interested in that, get in touch with Manish, and we can still take a look at some of your fields and see how you might think about starting next year.
Well,
Thank
thank you so much. This has been really informational. We sure appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you. So if we do not have any other questions, thank you all for your great participation and amazing questions. And I think that kept both Mike and Elizabeth engaged and kept them thinking. And I'm sure we all learned a lot. Let's look forward for the next seminar. And I think that's where the growing we'll talk about how to grow actually. And we'll hear from Ryan, who was here today. And I'm sure it will be again a great session. Thank you all, and have a good night.
One more
Thank
thing,
you all.
Manish,
Thank you all. It was
Manish,
excellent.
can you send out the recording? I want to review it again, for this
Yes.
wonderful.
We'll do the recording. We will clean it up and we'll make it available for all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon.
Good job. Good job.
Hey, Chris, your hands up. You have something?
I'm good. I just want to thank everybody. Excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for asking good questions. We appreciate it.
Yep.
And thank you, Tess, for your patience and your great support on slides. Amazing work, Tess. Thank you.
Happy to help everyone. Thank you all so much for coming and for participating. I hope to see everybody at the next session next week.
Good deal.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good
Good night.
Bye.